The school was supposed to be empty. I knew that because I was the one who had stayed behind after everyone else had left. But about 20 minutes after the final bell, I heard footsteps coming from the second floor. At first, I assumed it was a teacher. Then I heard the footsteps stop directly above me. I waited, nothing. Then they started again. Except this time, they were coming down the stairs. I stayed late at school pretty often during my final year. I wasn't doing anything unusual that night. I had a project to finish, and I had fallen behind during the week. Most students had already left by the time I packed up my things. The school always felt different after everyone went home. During the day, there were hundreds of voices, doors opening and closing, people walking through the halls. At night, all of that disappeared. The building became almost completely silent. I remember putting my backpack over my shoulder and checking the time on my phone. It was a little after 6:30. I figured I would be home within half an hour. I walked out of the classroom and started down the hallway. The lights were still on, but some of them flickered occasionally. I wasn't worried. The school was old, and the lights had been doing that for years. I reached the main staircase. That's when I heard something above me. A single footstep. I stopped. I looked up toward the second floor. Nothing. I waited for a few seconds. Nothing happened. I assumed it was probably a pipe or something falling over. I continued walking. Then I heard another footstep. This one was much clearer. Step. I stopped again. The sound had definitely come from the second floor. I looked up. The hallway above me was empty. I could see several classroom doors and the long row of windows along the opposite wall. Nobody was there. I stood there for maybe 10 seconds before deciding to keep going. I walked toward the front entrance. That's when I heard 3 more footsteps. Step, step, step. They were closer. I turned around, still nothing. For some reason, I suddenly felt uncomfortable. I pulled my phone out and checked the time again. 6:38. I started walking faster. Then I heard footsteps behind me. Not above me. Behind me. I turned around quickly. The hallway was empty. I stared down the corridor. Nothing moved. I actually laughed to myself because I felt stupid. I thought maybe I was just tired. I turned back toward the entrance. Then I heard another step. This time I was certain it had come from the staircase. I slowly turned around. The staircase was still empty. I walked toward it. I don't really know why I did that. Maybe I wanted to prove to myself that nobody was there. I climbed the first few steps. Nothing. I climbed higher. Still nothing. When I reached the second floor, the hallway was completely silent. I looked left, then right. There were no students, no teachers, no movement. I walked a few feet down the hallway. That's when I noticed one of the classroom doors was slightly open. I knew that classroom. It hadn't been used that afternoon. I walked toward it. The door was open maybe 2 inches. I reached out and pushed it wider. The classroom was dark. I turned on the lights. Nothing. There were empty desks, a whiteboard, and a few chairs stacked in the corner. I checked underneath the desks. I even looked inside the storage cabinet. Nobody was there. I felt relieved. I turned the lights off and closed the door. Then I heard footsteps behind me. I froze. They were coming from the other end of the hallway, slow, heavy. Someone was walking toward me. I couldn't see anyone, but I could hear every step. Step, pause, step, pause, step. I stood completely still. The footsteps stopped. I waited. Nothing. Then I heard a sound that made my stomach drop. A door opened. Somewhere behind me. I turned around. The classroom door I had just closed was open again. I stared at it. I was certain I had closed it. I slowly walked back toward it. I didn't want to go inside. I just wanted to close the door again. I reached the doorway. The classroom was still dark. I switched the lights on. Nothing had changed. Everything looked exactly the same. I walked inside and checked the windows. They were locked. I checked the door. There was nobody behind it. I started feeling embarrassed. I was letting my imagination get the better of me. I turned off the lights and walked back into the hallway. Then I heard a loud bang from downstairs. I immediately looked toward the staircase. I couldn't see the bottom from where I was standing. I waited, nothing, then another bang. I decided I had had enough. I started running toward the stairs. As soon as I reached them, I heard footsteps coming up. Someone was climbing the stairs. Fast, I stopped. The footsteps kept coming. I couldn't see anyone. They were getting closer. I backed away. The footsteps reached the final step, then stopped. I stared down the staircase. There was nobody there. I stood frozen for several seconds. Then I heard something behind me, a quiet sound, almost like someone breathing. I turned around. The hallway was empty. That was when I ran. I didn't care anymore if I looked ridiculous. I ran all the way downstairs and toward the side exit. I pulled the door open and practically threw myself outside. The cold air hit me immediately. I kept walking until I reached the parking lot. I didn't look back. I called home and told them I was on my way. I never mentioned what happened. The next morning, I came back to school. I expected everything to feel normal. It didn't. I kept thinking about the footsteps. During lunch, I asked a teacher if anyone had been working upstairs the previous night. The answer was no. According to them, the second floor had been empty after 6. I asked if there were security cameras. There were. So I went to the office and asked if they could check the footage. They agreed. We watched the recording from the hallway. At first, everything looked normal. I could see myself leaving the classroom. I could see myself walking toward the stairs. Then I saw something strange. At exactly 6:39 p.m., I stopped in the hallway. I was looking toward the staircase. The camera showed absolutely nothing there. But I was clearly reacting to something. A few seconds later, I walked toward the stairs. Then I disappeared from the camera's view. The hallway remained empty. For the next several minutes, nothing happened. No one entered, no one left, but then the camera captured something that I still can't explain. The classroom door on the second floor slowly opened by itself. It stayed open for several seconds. Then it closed. A few seconds later, it opened again. Nobody was near it. The teacher watching the footage with me didn't say anything. Neither did I. We just kept staring at the screen. Then I noticed something else. The time on the camera changed. It jumped from 6:43 to 6:51. 8 minutes were missing. I asked if the camera had malfunctioned. The teacher said it sometimes happened. Maybe that's true. Maybe there was a perfectly normal explanation for everything. But there's one thing I still can't explain. When I left the building that night, I was sure the footsteps had been following me. And when I watched the security footage the next day, I noticed that the classroom door opened before I ever reached the second floor, as if someone had already been waiting for me.